Hello and welcome to another edition of the Web Platform Podcast. Still designing, still making the web better. We are your hosts today, Justin Barrow.
And Danny Blue.
And Amal Hussein.
And today we have a wonderful guest on to talk about LeanUX. I don't know a lot about LeanUX, so I'm hoping to learn a little bit about it so we can have an interesting conversation. Everyone welcome, please, Sam Quayle. Sam, thanks for being on the show.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Can we all pause for 1 minute and recognize Justin's fantastic radio voice? I don't know if it's been said, but it's fantastic.
Why, thank you. I greatly appreciate that. You know, I drink lemon juice every night to make sure this beautiful voice stays consistent.
It's a pretty good voice. I like all the innuendos, too.
So, Sam, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm a design consultant here in England. Probably guessed from my accent. And I work for a company at the moment called Valtech, and we are kind of transitioning into being a bit of a digital agency. And we come from historically being a kind of big agile software development house. And through kind of working through them, I've kind of got interested in how do you do kind of design in an agile environment, and then LeanUX as well over the last couple of years. So yeah, that's me.
So when we talk about UX, and in particular LeanUX, what exactly are we talking about? Is it an agile process? Like, how does it work? What is the top level overview, if you will?
Well, I think we were lucky enough to get Jeff Gothelf in for a talk, and I've been seeing him speak a couple of times in the UK, and he always kind of describes it as how do you do UX in an agile environment. And then there's a lot of stuff in there about kind of hypothesis-driven development as well, and hypothesis-driven design. And then also just keeping your UX processes lean and as nimble as possible, really. So that's the kind of things that I see it as. I don't think anybody's come up with a absolute perfect definition of it yet, but that's to me from the book and conversations I've had with people. I think that's what it means to me.
So, just for comparison's sake, what is an alternative to LeanUX, so people can kind of see like the difference between doing it in the Lean way versus something else?
I think the opposite would be kind of, I guess, like a typical waterfall environment. So doing all the design up front and then passing it over to the various stages, and it kind of passes down. But then there's also kind of what you see kind of more commonly when you see design in an agile environment is they'll still the design team will still work like that, and they'll still pass things off to the development team, but they'll just kind of deliver it in sprints and break it down. But it's all kind of been predefined up front. I think that's the kind of the inverse of it, really.
I'm actually really glad you brought that up. That was one of the burning questions I had. Was every organization I've been in and project I've been on, there's a very thorough over the fence approach with UX, and even if they're iterating within the sprint, they're iterating from a point where they're negotiating with developers as opposed to actually collaborating. And so it's really, really interesting to hear you say that.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you get into design? Like, as designers have a tendency, like programmers, to have fantastic origin stories of how design sort of spoke to them and started their path down this wonderful journey of basically arguing with people constantly to get something done, which is what I feel like development is half of the time in some cases. How did you get started?
So I guess I started, I was in bands when I was a teenager, and we'd always need, like flyers and artwork and stuff like that, and we had a computer, and I just started doing that, producing artwork really, and then I never did any graphic design training. I went to uni. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and I did this kind of broad course that was called Multimedia Technology. And you kind of learn, like every 6 weeks, you'd have a different module. You'd learn like 3D design, game design, like digital illustration. And I came out, and I wasn't really particularly good at anything. I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. still didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then I think my mum and a friend needed a website at the time, and I thought, well, I'd kind of hacked around our band's website a few times in Dreamweaver, and so I thought I'll give it a go. And then off the back of that, I applied to an agency in Leeds, where I went to university, in where I'm living now as well, and just asked if I could go work for them for 2 weeks for free, basically. And yeah, I just enjoyed it and loved it. And then I kind of, since then, I've moved around a few agencies, a few more, I guess, like doing a lot more visual work at some of these agencies before. So like worked on One Direction website and things like that. And then I kind of started to get interested. I've always kind of done front-end development on the side, and kind of been interested in the delivery process of projects and things like that. And that's when I moved to Valtech. I knew that they were a big kind of agile company, and that's where I am now.
And so as you start to work through, you've been through a lot of processes. LeanUX is at its core sort of another type of process. How does the process work? Like, if you had to put it into steps, like for us non-designers out there, what are the steps you see LeanUX sort of driving towards sort of user experience design?
I think the first thing that we come up with, when we start any project or any new phase of development is try and come up with a list of our assumptions, basically. What are our assumptions about how the user is going to interact with this product, how it should be built, even things what it should look like. And then we kind of we go through a few exercises, often with the client, where we'll map these against and kind of prioritize them. And then once you've done that, you've got like a nice, reasonably developed backlog of assumptions that you can then start going away and deciding whether you're going to prove. So that might mean just going out and doing some user research, go talk to some users. It might mean doing some sketches and validating them, or it could be making like a functional prototype. But I think it's coming up with them assumptions, finding out what they are, and then proving them out, and then getting them to a point that they can start actually feeding into production-ready work.
Cool. So that kind of leads into the next question that I have, which is, how does LeanUX integrate with existing processes that are out there? Like, do you have to start from scratch, like at the very beginning, and say, we're doing a LeanUX process, or could you integrate it into an existing development workflow?
I've seen it work really well both ways. I think it's always going to be easier if everybody at this, if you start a brand new project and you think, right, we're going to from day one we're going to do LeanUX. It's all going to be hypothesis-driven development. At the same time, you're a bit of a disadvantage at the start of a project in that, particularly if it's brand new, in that you've got no starting point with any of the design work or any of the technical work. So if maybe you have a product or service that you're building on, you're running kind of agile, delivering it in an agile cadence. If you start to integrate and do some kind of more hypothesis-driven design and development at that point, you've already got a starting point there that you can iterate on. You've already got design assets. You might already have like a component or style guides. Whereas I think that's where I've seen people struggle a little bit with LeanUX, is if you start from nothing, you need to get to this point where you can produce these designs quickly and roughly, very quickly. So at the start, it's always a little bit harder.
And it's Jeff in his book, which Jeff and Josh wrote, the LeanUX book, they talk sort of about the design process as sort of less interrogational, more informal, when you start to sort of work through that sort of process at the beginning, where you must design something. That way we can get to a pattern library or something that can be used as a longer scoped thing, as any design or software project or whatever that thing may be sort of grows in scope. How do you do informal design work when you do have to eventually have somebody sign off and say this is the thing we're going to do. Like, is it a very deep process? Is it very user group studied? Do you have 10 people come in and tell you this is the design? This design works for me. Like, is there what does that look like?
It can look like a range of things, really. I think the important thing for us, whenever we try to do it, whether we're working in kind of low fidelity or high fidelity, is being completely transparent with the process. So that, and I think probably the most fundamental thing that we found is co-location with our clients, or being co-located on the project. And I think that's particularly important with the stakeholders, so that they can be involved, and it's a lot easier to kind of garner their feedback. Also, as well, with the users, involving users, we started doing co-design quite a lot in the early stages of projects. So doing kind of group sketching activities and that type of thing, and involving users in them to kind of solve problem statements effectively. We found that really useful. But yeah, it can take all kind of shapes. The design process, like I said, I think in the early stages, it's just important to get that in front of the client and make them get away from this. Like, the design department goes away in the corner and sits and goes and does design, and then brings it back, and somebody has to sign it off. If people are involved and people are contributing to it in some kind of way, we found that's like a really good way of reducing friction and getting to the end of the project and somebody sign it off. Another kind of thing that we've focused on a lot is getting members of the brand team as kind of key stakeholders in projects. Often when we would start a project, we would either kind of forget to engage somebody, there's like a brand guardian basically, or we wouldn't have access to them because they're too busy. They work for a big organization, they're spread across loads of projects. And yeah, sometimes you get to a stage where we'd be kind of 6 weeks into a project, we're just about to kind of get something that's almost signed off, and then brand would step in and kind of say, oh no, this isn't quite fit for purpose. So I think it's just being transparent. It's about getting the right people in the room, and I think that leads to kind of less shocks along the way, really.
Actually, I mean, I think that's a great question and a really great answer. I'm actually more interested in learning about how to get stakeholders on board as well. I mean, what type of, I mean, this is a really different process, right? And everyone knows change is scary, it's hard. How do you convince people that this is a good idea, right? And on both sides of the fence.
I think there's a couple of things with this, and it kind of goes a bit outside of just the UX or design team's remit. I think the appetite kind of needs to be there, or the client needs to have some kind of understanding of the agile process from the start. And if they don't, then you kind of need to, that's as a priority, you need to kind of educate them in that to a certain degree. And sorry, could you just repeat the question again?
Yeah, essentially, I mean, how do you convince designers, right, and developers that this is a good idea, right? I mean, developers will freak out saying, well, how am I supposed to estimate things when I don't have wireframes, or I don't have a clear vision of what it is we're building? And I think for designers, it's kind of like, well, that's not the way I work. I need to kind of flush things out, ahead of developers. I need to be a bit more prepared, etc. Right? I mean, so this is kind of like, it seems like it's extreme agile in some regards, and so I just wanted to, if there had been kind of, if organizations or teams have had issues embracing this new philosophy.
Yeah, I think. Kind of mentioned at the start, making sure the client has a reasonable understanding of agile. But then I think we always have on our projects a role that's called a delivery manager, and they're really kind of key to enabling this whole process and the kind of go-between between clients, the development team, the engineers, and the design team. And I think that's a really important role to have. They're responsible for making sure everyone's on the same page, everyone knows how everyone's working. Yeah, I think that's really important for us. And if you don't have that role, somebody who's kind of empowered to say, this is how we're trying to work, this is how we should be working, and it just comes from the design team, then often you get a lot of pushback on it. I think one of the other kind of key things that we found to the success of this is when we started off, we still had a kind of design team and the development team working in kind of disparate silos really on the project, and design teams weren't being kind of made fully part of the product team in a way. You know, they weren't part of kind of any of the agile ceremonies. They weren't doing stand-ups. So that was one of the first things that we did and that's something our delivery managers do now, is ensure that there isn't kind of any silos between the two. You know, designers and developers are all doing the same things every day, even if they might be working on slightly different streams of work. I think just making everyone kind of feel more as a unit really helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be very hard to bring teams together, regardless of the process that you're in. I think that's you know, an ongoing challenge as pipelines and tooling and sort of philosophies sort of evolve over the course of any given sort of organization or team, and they have a tendency to, like, you know, I know we work in some agile teams, and it's not necessarily by the book agile, I suppose. But does that mean that you can't ship? Does that mean that you miss deadlines? No. You know, at the end of the day, you still have to find some means to limit your feature creep, which is sort of my next question. Is that, you know, is feature creep problematic? Like most things, you have hypotheses, you have user stories, you have these are the places we want to go. But a lot of times, once you start to get into the design phase and things of that nature, both on the development and on the UX side, is that clients have a tendency to want to say, "Oh, well, I saw the new shiny thing, and I would like to add to this user story of things," which does not make an estimate happy by any means.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have does Lean sort of take that into account when you start to work through those sort of informal design reviews to get towards your, you know, sort of stock library of this is the way this is going to generally look as we go forward?
Yeah, I think on that kind of first point, the feature creep. I think that, you know, LeanUX is one of the best things and most powerful kind of ways of working that I found to try and reduce that, because when you're proving out, you know, the product owners or whoever might come up with an idea, or they think, oh, we want this. And if you can actually prove that's not working in some way, and you have kind of ways of testing and showing that, I always find that incredibly powerful. And I think they have to be a pretty pig-headed person to, after you present them with the evidence that, no, actually this isn't the best route forwards, to still go ahead with it. Yeah, I think they have to be pretty strong-willed, really.
Yeah.
And they're out there. They're out there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. But, I mean, at the moment, I'm working on a project for a government department in the UK, and we get a lot of there's kind of like policy teams, and changes to policy can sometimes take years to come down and actually manifest itself into changes in a you know, whether it's a paper form or an online service. And at the start, we were like, how are we going to get these guys to change anything? You know, it's just talking to a brick wall. But I think that kind of regular engagement and actually proving things quickly and cheaply through prototypes and playing that back to kind of you know, quite senior, almost politician level people has been a really powerful tool in our arsenal to stop, you know, features creeping, and to kind of, you know, be a bit more user need driven than policy driven.
Yeah. I would imagine that one of the oldest functioning governments in the world is bringing LeanUX into that. That I think you should like blog about that. I think that would be a very interesting post.
I'm
bringing Agile to the UK government. you know, fascinating.
I mean, to be honest, we are actually really lucky in the UK. We have what's called Government Digital Services, which is essentially our digital cabinet office, and this was started by some super clever guys, and they have come up with a kind of standard for all government services going forward. that how digital services should be delivered in government, and it's super good, and it mentions a lot of it does kind of reference LeanUX. It talks about a lot about every project must be built and delivered in an agile way. So actually, it's been really refreshing to work in this environment, because when I joined the project, I had the same thoughts as you. It's like, this is gonna suck. This is gonna be really hard. But actually, and I think having being able to reference other government departments that do, this department's doing this in this certain ways, has also been helpful. So.
And we actually have 18F in the U.S., which is
absolutely
part of the GSA, it is nice to see governments doing.
They're trying.
They're trying,
Yeah.
and they're doing better. I will say they are doing better.
Yeah, no,
I think
they're
Australia.
certainly leapfrogging, which is great. It's really nice to see the leapfrogging. I have a book recommendation for you. Articulating Design Decisions by Tom Griever. Really good book on kind of like thinking and kind of how to be collaborative with design. I would imagine there's a lot of collaboration happening with this new process.
Yeah.
Do you think that LeanUX kind of helps articulate design decisions better for development teams that are using this process?
I think so. Yeah, I think one of the points that we didn't really get from LeanUX, it kind of actually came a bit more from this government digital services arm, is the idea of showing things and not telling people. I've worked in agencies before where I've spent so long just typing up rationale to design decisions and things like that, and people don't really ever read them. So the idea of showing things about, the walls in our project room are absolutely covered in, anything that we've got, any sketches, printouts of screens. We've got a kind of publicly available prototype that we can see, and I think that's been really helpful to us. To articulate decisions without actually having to articulate them, just like putting things up on the wall, or even better, prototyping. If you can create some kind of functional prototype, that goes so much further and is so much quicker to get, to get feedback from. And I think as well with prototyping is you're not kind of forcing the conversation, you're not leading questions. If you can put that in somebody's hands and they can come to their own conclusions about it, you're going to get better and more honest feedback from it.
So I actually have a question about prototyping, because I've had both good and bad experiences with prototyping. So in this case, first of all, when you say prototype in this case, which is kind of the result of something that you're doing, what do you mean specifically as what is a prototype to you guys?
I think it's a really good question, because it varies. It varies massively. Typically, it will be a HTML prototype for us, because we've got to a stage where we've got a really well-established style guide and component library. Actually, putting them prototypes together, and because there's no real, on this project specifically, there's no kind of fancy animation or anything like that where you might use something like Framer.js for. It's more kind of user journey led. So typically it's just a kind of HTML prototype that use predefined styles and components, and then often just tied together with some throwaway JavaScript to kind of mimic some kind of natural or lifelike experience. I've seen people go to the nth degree. Another project that we're running, I was talking to a lady, and she was the user researcher was actually creating JSON data for this almost kind of like gold-plated prototype, and they'd really gone to town on it, and it was all, it was almost passable as a functioning product. But I think it depends on what you're trying to prove, and obviously the context of the application as well, really.
So I have to ask, because I've run into this situation before in my time working for a digital agency. Have you ever presented a prototype to a client, and then the client, which then sees this very pretty thing moving around and acting like a real
Mhm.
application, does that then affect their expectation of how long it's supposed to take something to be built for real?
Um, I think so. Yeah, yeah. To clients, sometimes it can be, particularly who are detached a little bit from the development process. Like, well, this is working on the screen, and this is taking, somebody a day and a half to work. Why is it taking? Why is it going to take another 6 weeks to actually get it to work? Yeah, I guess it's just an education, a kind of client education issue.
I'm always curious because I have a lot of opinions about prototype about those particular types of things because I've gotten into too much trouble before in the past with things like that, and those are very hard holes to dig yourself out of.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
But and I don't mean to say that prototypes aren't helpful. That's not what I meant at all. They are extremely helpful and extremely valuable to clients. I think it's like you said, it is absolutely an education thing.
Yeah, I mean, we have the problem as well as when you in early stage of a project or where you're still quite rough, you know, putting a HTML prototype that the design is quite a way off being anything near polished, and the client kind of thinking, well, is this what it's going to look like, and getting worried about that. We've also had that kind of problem in the past, but again, I think it just comes down to being transparent about what you're doing and kind of reassuring the client that, yeah.
Yeah, setting expectations is sort of key with anything, right? You have to
Absolutely,
set
yeah.
expectations as to what this thing is and what this thing means, sort of in the scheme of things. And at times those expectations can be very difficult because people aren't necessarily going to. Obviously, to some extent you sit in a bubble against your requirements or your spec or the concept you're trying to deliver, because you don't know what's going on the other side necessarily. By the time you show it and they've seen it and then they're saying, I want it next week, you don't really know if it's someone new, if it's someone you've worked for before, or you work internally with them. You might have a better understanding, but you're always going to have that one. I don't know a developer or a designer or anybody who's done any work in any industry who hasn't had the one who's just like, I need it tomorrow, and it kind of worked.
Yeah.
Build me a wall, sort of scenario of a thing in a building. Because why not? So in terms of, sort of, you've gone through the sort of prototyping process. You've done some informal reviews. You talked a little bit about brand, and I'm always curious about brand because certain brands have logo guidelines, design guidelines, style guidelines, which then fit into their sort of own guide of things. I know some of them can be very dense, and then some of them can be non-existent. As you start to go through this LeanUX process, how long does it take to get to that style guide? And sort of your average project, I realize that could vary wildly based on the requirements of what you're actually trying to build. But how long does it take to get there? How do you use a style guide in a UX or a LeanUX sort of process after after it exists?
I think having one in place is super important because it just means the quicker that you can get an insight to the point of and then testing it and validating and that type of thing. We tend to work, at the start of a project, there will be some kind of calibration time where the tech guys are, setting up servers or environments or making tech decisions. At the same time, the kind of front-end team are doing similar things and kind of putting in a base structure for a style guide. And there's hundreds, probably thousands of style guide, starter kits online. I've seen people not particularly successfully, but kind of reverse engineer bootstrappers, and kind of add their styles on later on.
Doesn't really work all that well sometimes, does it?
No, I probably wouldn't advocate that approach myself. But we will typically, at the start of a project, we try working kind of vertical slices of functionality. Instead of delivering a very broad experience to a poor level of quality, we might just focus on one particular small user journey, whether that's a form or I don't know, perhaps a sign-in flow or something like that. And to actually do that, you don't need a whole big level of components. And I think if you can do that, that allows the kind of designers to focus a bit more narrowly and get something out the door that's of a higher quality than spending all this time trying to come up with like a full range of components that will do everything. Just focus on what you absolutely need to get that kind of MVP or that first release out the door. Yeah, that's kind of worked particularly for us, and then kind of build things out once you have this kind of starting point. Then you can kind of build things out further from there.
I've actually, so this is like maybe the third or fourth time I've heard you mention components, and I know at my company, we have a style guide and we've created a bunch of components, and it's really like helped us just kind of plug and play with a lot of minor UI stuff and work, and so I'm wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit about your toolkit, like what's your toolkit, and what do you use to kind of help you go from ideation into creation, and what best practices such as having a style guide or shared components do you use?
Okay, so we like I said, the project I'm working on is not particularly visually led. It is a government project, but it's quite nice at the same time. So there's a kind of front end toolkit that the government provides that is essentially like a load of mixins, like variable definitions of colors, type, spacing, that type of thing. And then they have, it's really good as a kind of community of designers, we discuss among different government departments design patterns, and people will suggest design patterns to solve particular problems, whether that's navigation or it might be, how to do like an address lookup or something like that. And then we'll discuss them and people will go away and test these and come back. So, but we've developed a lot of our own. So our toolkits really, we have a build process. So we use Grunt at the moment. We have we use a tool called Assemble to essentially it allows you to do kind of YAML markup in the top of a HTML page and kind of input YAML into the templates.
It's like a static site generator, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have kind of SAS as our pre-processor for styles, and that's pretty much it. It's not mega complex. I went to a really good talk a couple of months ago from it was a lady from IBM who does a lot of talking about kind of style guides and component libraries, and theirs is absolutely next level. They're outputting JSON so that it can you can create kind of Android design components from it and iOS, and it will also output it for CSS. It is it's super next level stuff. But ours is it's a web-based project that we're working on, and it's relatively simple. Yeah, I guess the kind of taking the next step further would be getting to something that's kind of almost like a living style guide. I think Lonely Planet have got their living style guide, which they use. So that's actually where the kind of style guide and the component that are declared in there, the markup and styles and things like that, are actually used in production code. It's not like you just kind of using them as a reference and copying them across. I think that's where style guides are heading, and it's something that I'd be interested in exploring a little bit more.
And there are a lot of tools out there now too, in terms of sort of things that exist today. Zeppelin. I know we just recently started playing with Zeppelin, which is sort of a designer/developer tool that generates style guides. And the tooling has gotten significantly better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And there's web components now. Web components to the rescue, right? So
yeah,
really, it really is plug and play, which is nice. Help us, get to the real value prop, right? The real problem that we're trying to solve more quickly.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's awesome. And so I guess I have a general question for you, and kind of in maybe. This stems a little bit more from your background with working with government organizations now. So software is kind of now it's not just full stack tech companies, right? I mean, it's distributed across all of these different industries, and I'm kind of really wondering, what are some of the common challenges that you've been seeing, and how has LeanUX kind of been helping with that problem?
I think one of the main problems that it solves is people building the wrong thing. LeanUX kind of came out of the Lean startup movement. So there's a lot of influence there, particularly startups, coming up with an idea and going away and spending loads of money, and then soon realizing that once they spent all that money that it wasn't maybe the right thing that they should have been building. And that's totally applicable to not just as an entire company idea. That can boil right down to a feature or a page that somebody's proposing in an organization. So I think it stops people kind of hopefully building the wrong thing or kind of making uninformed decisions. I think bridging the gap between UX and design and development teams is certainly one that I find is been really helpful for us. Working, adopting similar processes and working in similar ways really helps kind of improve that cohesion between team and reduce, kind of any barriers or frictions that often occur when you have this kind of us versus them mentality. And I think also just reducing the amount of time that to get things out the door, and getting value to a customer, and getting feedback. I think if you're not stuck in this rigid process of I've seen some really not just all product processes of this is design, this is development, this is testing. Actually the design process, I've seen really elongated versions of that are really rigid. It has to start off and maybe with like a information architect, and it has to be wireframe, then it has to be fully designed, then it's just all these extra phases. And I think LeanUX kind of gets away from that, and allows that process to be a bit more nimble, a bit more throwaway, in the interest of getting things out the door as quickly as possible and getting value into the user's hands, really. So I think they're the main three for me.
I really like your first point. Just keep people from building the wrong thing. I like that a lot, especially in government as well. So it does make a lot of sense for startups, but in government, people can, if you get it wrong, that's taxpayer money that you're spending on something. So I think it is even more important for people to recognize some of these things, even if you're not directly involved, just so that you can show, because it is very important to not spend 8 months, a year on something and then have it be a total disaster or have to completely pivot from one thing to another. So I like that. I chuckled when you said that, but it is really true though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so sorry, Justin, did you want to say something?
No, I was just gonna stand. I was just gonna sit here. It's cool. Go ahead, Danny.
So you were also talking about. I mean, that's what we expect of Justin, just to sit there and look pretty. So.
And sound great.
And sound great. That's right. We did establish that. So, do you think that there is any point in the entire development process? So, UX, so the UX process starts up, and we integrate with other things. And I don't want to retread a bunch of things that you've already very eloquently explained. But just very specifically, do you think there's ever a time where UX is no longer a part of the process? And by that I mean, it's like, do you get to a certain point where you can just roll off all of your UX designers and all of your design people just for a development part, or do you see value in keeping design involved in the process, like you said, making sure it's involved at the beginning, and then also making sure that it's involved all the way through the end?
It's a tough question. I think certainly the level of, as a project matures, the involvement, I guess, of having a specialist UX person, I guess, dips, and it depends really on whether the project is going to continue to iterate and improve, which in my eyes they should. But I think when you've got I keep coming back to these kind of style guides or libraries. When you have them in place, that kind of democratizes the design process to a certain degree. And I think if you've been working with teams in this kind of lean UX way, involving developers, involving stakeholders in the process, then they're already kind of, once a project's far down the line, they've already kind of got the tools there to not have to pass every decision, every bit of functionality through a designer, through a UX guy to consider. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. That's kind of a point that we're getting to. We have on our team now, I started as the kind of UX design guy in it, really, and we have a front-end developer, and we also have a content designer. And I think the content design has been a bit of a game changer for me, really. I've never kind of worked with one before, and I think so much of what we do in UX is actually about the content, and a lot of the feedback that you're getting is just pretty much about the words that are on the screen. And I think when you have somebody who can do that, and you've got a front-end guy who can create any front-end components or reuse them, there's not a whole lot of, unless you're creating an absolutely brand new user journey. I like to think that the LeanUX project kind of upskills the rest of the team to be able to handle kind of new functionality in the future. But yeah, unless a kind of a project or product's going to stagnate for a long period after kind of being, I guess, functionally complete, I kind of wouldn't suggest fully getting rid of the UX team, and I also don't want to put myself out of a job. So yeah, absolutely needed.
I know I can't live without my designers and researchers, and so you're really critical to every project. You're not going anywhere, at least until until like at the very least until CSS gets eliminated or magically solved or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Very
well, so much of the stuff seems to people seem to want to put it in a bottle, like, oh, it's done, now it can be there. Whether that's code or design, I think that can be a very slippery slope, because at that point, when you say, a lot of times when people say things are done, like, we've done the research and this is the one way it works, sort of continuous data collection and user study and can this be better? This concept of always sort of constantly iterating over into the next thing that does basically delivers more value. And you mentioned delivering more value to users at the end of the day faster. But I like to also think of it as continuous, which can get lost. Obviously, if you work in the client business, clients have projects, ideally.
Yes,
sometimes it's project. And you don't necessarily get to do all the things you want to do, or at least in my experience. And that can be rough, both not just for us as people who have to design and build these things, but for end users, because end users want to see improvements. So I think that to Danny's question, which is a very hard question. Thanks, Danny. Way to really lead us down a road here.
You're welcome.
It can be a difficult thing to balance in any sort of project or organization.
Yeah.
Well, I also think that, again, like now with software and tech kind of like becoming more distributed across many different industries, right? You have industries that are, traditionally used to like a thing, right? And when a thing gets developed, that thing is better be perfect, better be done, And I think with, software, there's the next release, there's, constant, patches that you can do. And I think that, that's a big mentality shift for most industries. And so, I think it's really important to kind of also be cognizant of that. And there's a lot of educating, that I think folks like yourself, and us, can really do to help to kind of communicate that. It's we can change it. It's completely flexible, and it should be. It's designed to be flexible and change and get better, ideally.
Yeah, not all industries are the same, obviously. True, that's a good point. I mean, if you're designing a forklift and you've got the big red button and the big green button, you need to make sure those are very clear things what they do when you're operating the heavy machinery of a thing. And it's not like you can go, oh, you know what, we just shipped 10,000 of those. Let's just bring them back.
Unless it's like a forklift made by Tesla.
This is true. Then it's just all a software update away.
Then it's like push update to the forklift. Then we're all set.
Yeah, I mean, it's starting to kind of bleed out into music industry. You know, you're seeing more and more artists, because they can distribute their music digitally, they can do updates to their albums that they couldn't do before, because they'd have to press a load more CDs. I just think it's interesting, kind of, different industries working in a similar way. It's not just delivering this one final product. And we've certainly got the capabilities to be able to, increase the version number, increase features, and constantly improve it. So why not do it?
This is why I push random version updates that have no bug fixes or patches. It's just the same thing repackaged. Look, the number is growing, people. It's growing. It's magic. No, I do not do that. That would be bad. Just saying.
Also, and npm install magic. That's what I should look for?
Yes. When in doubt, is Justin doing any work? Oh, how many versions did you ship this week? 17. Wow, it's amazing.
I think that's how we should measure developer performance at this point.
Right, exactly.
It feels like
how recently has your version number bumped up, right?
I feel like it is the next terrible leap from how many commits does somebody have.
It is about lines drawn, commits. How many green dots is on your GitHub profile, right? Ooh. Look how many times I use the paintbrush in Illustrator. These are not metrics. Please stop putting developers and designers to these metrics. It's a horrible metric. Horrible.
Not good.
Totally sidetracked this conversation at this point into something else.
It's fine. We're running in. We're starting to run time. This is exactly all babbles out.
Oh no, you're breaking up, Danny. But that's okay. Danny's turning into a robot. That's why he sounds like that.
Too many commits.
Well, too many commits. Right. He's going into the machine, becoming one with the machine. But I guess, Sam, this has really been a really informative talk, and I just kind of would love to get some parting words from you. Any kind of like any advice, words of wisdom. Whatever your favorite color is, whatever you want to talk about.
I don't know. I think if you're interested in starting it, you don't have to. It's not. I don't think LeanUX to me isn't really it's like a methodology or anything like that. It's just like somebody came up with a load of useful principles really that you can adopt it and do. And I don't think you have to be kind of phased by trying to do it. You can start off relatively small. Try come up with some hypotheses in your own project and see if you can prove them out, without having to get kind of executive decisions. And I think just kind of generally being more transparent in the way we work as designers is something that, even since I started working is changed, and there's much more of an appetite, and there's less kind of keeping things behind closed doors. And I think ultimately it ends to creating better products and working better as a team, and that's what we're striving for, really, I guess.
And go ahead. You were literally going to say the same thing I was going to say.
All right, Sam. And if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way? Twitter handle, GitHub, any of that stuff?
Twitter handle probably best. Yeah, at Sam Quayle, QAYLE.
Awesome. Well, thank you very, very much for coming on. As long as I don't sound like a robot now, I can do the wonderful exit. But Sam, thank you very much. Like Amel said, this has been very, very informative. I think you bring up a lot of things that a lot of people can relate to, just in terms of the software development cycle, not specifically just UX. So, again. I just wanted to say thank you very much. And with that, I think that this has been episode 91 of the Web Platform Podcast, talking all about LeanUX. Sam Quayle, thank you very, very much.
Thanks, guys. My pleasure.